Hello and welcome to Simplified. This is PowerDrift. Simplified is a series that we do where we take complicated ideas and break them down into something simple. And today we are talking about how do you use your brakes. But before we get into that, please do hit the subscribe button, the bell notification icon, and if you like this video, please do like and share it with your friends. So, the brakes. What most people don't realize about their motorcycles is that the most powerful control on their motorcycle is not their engine, it's the brakes. To put a number out of a hat, if you have a 40 bhp motorcycle, it probably has 80 bhp brakes. That's how strong they are. Most motorcycle engines today will struggle to get to 1 G of acceleration. That's 9.8 meters per second square. But most disc brakes today will easily achieve 1 G if the grip levels are okay. So, it is really important to figure out how to use the brakes. And the reason why this is important is because when you have a really powerful tool, then you need to learn how to use it or you will hurt yourself. Your brakes are so powerful that using a lot of force on the brakes is always going to cause problems. To see what this means, take a pen, hold it as tightly as you possibly can and try to write something on a piece of paper and realize your handwriting has just gone to like the dogs, right? And the reason is you're using so much force that it becomes difficult for you to modulate. So, the first thing you want to change about braking on a motorcycle, especially one with disc brakes, instead of using 4 fingers to stop the motorcycle, you use 2. If you have really powerful brakes, use 1. The second thing you have to understand about a powerful control, especially this powerful control, is that you can't really slam on them. When you do this, what happens is that the brake absolutely locks the wheel instantly, and as soon as it does that, the ABS kicks in and unlocks the wheel, and that means suddenly you feel like I could brake a lot harder before ABS kicked in, but once the ABS kicked in, the motorcycle just sort of runs on, and ABS is making your stopping distances longer. It is, but the problem is not the brakes, it's not the ABS, it's how you use them. When you hit the brakes on a motorcycle, you transfer a lot of weight to the front of the motorcycle, right? And if you know what traction is like, put your hands together, they slide easily, put them together with pressure and they don't slide easily anymore, that's traction. As I load the front wheel harder, so let's say this is the ground and this is my front wheel, as I load this up, I get more and more grip. And the idea that you want to use for your front brake is the more grip I generate by braking, the more braking I can use right after that. And you basically ramp the curve. So as you generate more grip, you can use more and more braking. So in terms of suspension movement, a great braking maneuver should be like it dips, 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 and come to a stop like that. But if you do this, the brake force comes on very strong, but the tire doesn't have enough grip to deal with it, and therefore you kick yourself into ABS, or if you don't have ABS, you have a crash. So, how do you use the brakes absolutely right? First, we have to eliminate the rear brake from the situation, because remember, if I'm transferring weight forward by using the brakes, what I'm also doing is unloading the rear wheel, which means the amount of traction at the rear wheel is now coming down. If I continue to use the rear brake heavily, either I will kick the rear into ABS, which is not really a crisis, but you will, it's inefficient, or you lock the rear wheel up, which again you can recover from, it's not difficult to do. As long as your vision is up, the rear wheel will usually fall back into line, but it's inefficient, it slows you down, and it's just a waste of effort. There are exceptions to this, and we'll come to that last. So what you want to do is focus entirely on the front brake, and today's motorcycles go into a stoppie, and what a stoppie means is 100% of the weight of the motorcycle is on the front wheel, there's no weight on the rear wheel at all, and at that point you should be using 100% front brakes and 0% rear. For most of us, in decent conditions, you'd use something like 80% front brake, 20% rear brake, 70% front, 30% rear. On the racetrack, we don't use the rear brake almost at all unless there is a stability issue with the motorcycle as you go into a corner, at which point you might be using the rear brake just to settle the chassis a little bit and control that movement. But you don't really use it to slow down the motorcycle a lot. The manufacturers who'd like to err on the side of caution will always tell you to use both brakes equally. That's good starting advice, but as you learn to use your brakes better, you should be relying on your front brake more and more and more. So what should you use the rear brake for at all? The rear brake comes into play when traction is slightly dicey. So if the roads are sandy, if there's water on the road, you want to use a lot more rear brake than you would otherwise. If you have a pillion, also remember you've loaded the rear wheel with the pillion's weight, then you can use a lot more rear brake as well. The reason why we say use the rear brake a lot more in these conditions is primarily because a front wheel sliding out because of braking or otherwise is much harder to save than a sliding rear wheel, and therefore it is safer to err on the side of caution. And in the wet, I will use almost 50-50 braking pressure. I will still rely on the front for the maximum part of my braking, but I will bring a lot more rear into that picture. So, in sum, you have to learn to use your brakes, and the only way you can do that is to practice. I promise you, I've been riding the racetrack for I think 12 or 13 years now. Braking is still my weakest point. It is still the thing that scares me the most. The fact that they decelerate so much harder than I can accelerate, that learning how to use that control is a much more complicated skill for me. So, How should you practice braking? When I began, what I used to do is on my commute, I identified stretches of road that were always isolated, deserted, there was no traffic around, and you need 50, 100 meters of space. And you go into that place, check your mirrors once and ensure there's nobody behind you, and then do a panic brake maneuver. When you do it the first time, what you are going to do is grab the brake like this, you'll kick yourself into ABS immediately and have a lot of trouble stopping. What I want you to try the next time is to ease into the brakes and continuously and gently increase the pressure on the brakes. As you increase the pressure, you increase the grip level, you'll realize that your motorcycle stops a lot shorter, and it should feel like the suspension is compressing, comes to a stop like that. That's what it should feel like. The other thing that you need to know about brakes is that this is okay when you're stopping the motorcycle and coming to a point of zero. But most of the time, we'll use the brakes to control the speed of the motorcycle as we go into corners, right? And at that point, you don't want to let the brake off like a spring, because what that actually does is make the springs in the suspension work. So if I'm braking really hard and the front is compressed and I let the brake off, the bike will basically jump up like this because the pressure on the suspension releases and the spring starts to work. When it does this, it's an unstable system and you will not be able to turn the motorcycle. So what you want to do is brake, and then release the brake, gently allowing the suspension to have a controlled expansion rather than an uncontrolled explosion, right? So that you can decide how the chassis feels when you turn it, and this is for beginner and intermediate riders. Advanced riders may not let off the brakes even as they are turning the motorcycle, because the pressure on the front end suspension compresses that. It creates a sharper motorcycle, a more responsive motorcycle, and we can use that to turn the motorcycle onto an even tighter line if we need to. So, fundamentals of brakes, they are the most powerful control on your motorcycle. Do not be ham-fisted with them. Try to use 2 or 1 finger to use them. Try to learn to control the brake force. If you do this, the ABS intervention will come very late and you'll have very, very short stopping distances. The only exception to using the front brake so heavily is in the wet, or if there's sand on the road and stuff, where you don't want the front to wash out and you're okay with the rear sliding a little bit. In most of the other situations, the rear brake doesn't really contribute much to the process of stopping a motorcycle hard. But when you're riding along normally and using the brakes only to control your speed, remember not to let off the brakes like a spring. It will unsettle your motorcycle and you'll have to wait for it to settle before you can do the next thing. So you do want to control the brake on and you want to control the brake off as well. Famous riders like Freddie Spencer would actually have the throttle on while they were releasing the brakes, so that the suspension could be controlled in terms of how much expansion it has, so that they had the smoothest possible entry into a corner. Thank you so much for watching. This is Simplified on PowerDrift. Today we were talking about how to use the brakes. If there's more you'd like to discuss on this, leave us a comment. If there's other topics you'd like us to attack, leave us a comment as well. And if there's any other topic at all in the motorcycle universe that you'd like to discuss, leave us a comment and we'll get right on it. Before I leave you, I would invite you to do the usual thing. Please hit the 4 buttons for us: subscribe, the bell notification icon, like and share. This video I do think you should share with your friends, because braking is the least understood skill on motorcycles, as mission critical as it is, and that beggars belief as far as I am concerned. And I'm hoping that this video will change things a little bit. Thank you.